Halo Pak. Eh, halo. Sudah aman, sudah join di kelasnya. Sudah masuk. Iya. Pak sekarang mau ikut nggak? 7:30. Iya, 7:30 karena kita ada sidang terbuka untuk apa? Untuk eh, sidang terbukanya jam 10 karena pakabannya baru bisa jam 11. Jadi di apa dimundurkan. Iya. Bapak mau ikut nggak? Itu udah saya kasih link ya. Nggak apa-apa kalau ingin ngobrol dulu sama Nicholas. Iya, nggak apa-apa. Coba nanti saya minta operator untuk naikkan Pak Iskandar ke panelis. Ya, mm-mm. Ya, oke. Mm-mm. Kalau sertifikat udah dibuatkan kok Pak, nanti Pak Asep tanda tangan direktur. Mhm, mhm. Mhm. Ya. Mhm. 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 Oh, iya Pak. Mhm. Oke Pak. Oke, thank you. Ya Pak. Ya, oke. Yo. Ya, Pak Iskandar just calling me.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe he will join with us, but actually maybe he just become a participant. He said like that because maybe he has another meeting today.
Okay.
Fasya gimana, Pak Ade, Fasya?
Sudah Pak, beliau sudah langsung mau join katanya.
Oh, oke. Salam. Apa Nan?
Mau ke Pak Andi tadi belum datang.
Oh, mungkin di sana di apa di eh,
All right.
Fasya, tolong Pak Iskandar Zulkarnain Siregar dimasukkan ke panelis Fasya di partisipan.
Berarti rangkaian acara yang ini Pak yang
Bapak siapa?
Iskandar Jet Siregar ada di situ. Tolong masukkan.
Ya, baik Pak.
berarti untuk rangkaian acara yang ini Pak tinggal di unit memang gitu. Apa
Gimana Fasya? Bisa?
ya Pak?
Sebentar Pak, Pak Ade lagi nelpon. Ini belum join, belum bisa katanya.
Iskandar Jet Siregar tolong dinaikkan ke panelis partisipan attendi.
Hifni, maaf boleh minta tolong.
Baik.
Halo Pak Iskandar. Morning.
Hello, good morning. Hello, Nicholas.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good. Hopefully, up there the what you call it, storm or pass by, yeah, already passed.
Yeah, I certainly I hope so.
Yeah. But there is a warning, yeah. Still warning.
Yeah.
Last time we invited a speaker from Mississippi, and then during 3 hours before the event, total blackout in
Oh no.
the Stark file, yeah, Starkville, yeah. And then he wait at the university until 3 hours there, and the electricity is on again, and then finally he could give a talk. Yeah, otherwise we announced that the talk will be rescheduled, but attendees
Right.
already there. Yeah, quite a number. Yeah, hopefully.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. I think we'll get through it.
Yeah. Is the Ida hurricane or no, different one? Yeah.
I'm sorry, was that directed towards me?
The hurricane or the storm, what's the name? Ida.
Oh yeah, so Ida went through.
Went through. Okay.
That was last week.
Last week.
Spawned some tornadoes. We had quite a bit of flooding in the general region. Very intense flooding. So fair bit of damage.
Good. Yeah.
But it's mostly recovered now.
Yeah.
At least in my part of the country. In Louisiana, they're not expecting power restoration for several more weeks.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope there is no problem for our webinar today, ya Pak Iskandar.
Yeah, I think so.
Check the forecast again. I think we're good.
Okay, we are still waiting for another speaker, Pak Ade, ya, Nicholas. This is okay?
Yeah, no worries. You guys have the time constraint. I can stay up as late as I need to stay up.
No, maximum is at 10, ya, 10 o'clock Indonesian Western time.
Now let me see. Do I have the ability, if I choose to share my screen?
Maybe you can try first.
Yeah, let's test that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
yeah. So I'm gonna need to be given that ability. I don't currently have the ability to share my screen.
Oke, Hipni tolong Nicholas dijadikan co-host.
Baik, Pak. Sudah, Pak.
Maybe you can try now, Nick.
Yeah, let me give it a second try. Oh, yep, it looks just fine. And I'm just gonna test that, and I'm assuming that you can see that okay.
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Okay, great. I'll stop until it's time. There we go.
Unikanya mana nih, Pasha, Tiffany? Ini nanti yang buka kalau Bu Imelda ada, Bu Imelda. Kalau nggak ada, saya berarti. Jadi saya yang buka dan jadi moderator. Yeah, actually I have planned to visit US ya Pak Iskandar, to Sajid ya, to Sujit ya. Yeah,
Oh,
actually
yeah?
actually I have fund from GIZ ya, Germany actually.
Okay.
That way I can use to conduct some visit, I think. But they asked me to not only visiting US, but I have to give some maybe a lecture like that. Then
I
they will
see.
allow. So I think it is quite difficult to do that.
Well,
think
you,
it's- Yeah, I think it's okay. Nicholas steady experience as a mine inspector in different
Mhm.
companies in Indonesia, from the big one, coal mining, and also the Freeport one ya, up there in Papua ya, this tembaga tuh apa ya, Tembagapura ya,
Magapura.
yeah, so you can explain to the maybe students about the regulation as well as the best practice ya,
yeah.
in Indonesian, not only gold mining, nickel mining, coal of course, the largest one.
Yeah, well,
I think it's good to share also.
We would certainly be welcome at Temple, both
Yeah.
to visit,
Yeah.
we could have an office for you, and also to give a presentation. Those topics are also really
Yeah.
relevant. We have something called the Professional
Yeah.
Geologist's License. It's a credential
Oh, yeah.
you get
Yeah.
when you're a senior geologist.
Mhm.
And a
Yeah.
big component of it deals with, mining and other related issues. And so we could even advertise it, because that license requires continuing education. You have to participate in seminars and other things to keep learning. And so it would be a good fit for that.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the period of this funding is already passed, so I cannot use. Actually, I have this funding to visit another country, but unfortunately, the period is already passed, and I just get for the laptop and then for the InFocus from this project.
Travel is a little difficult right now.
Yeah, travel. But then I still keep my travel funding, so until now, no worry. We'll visiting Philadelphia.
Well, now that we're co-authors and it's published.
Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah, it's good. I think
yesterday.
I just read from the Asian Channel News this morning about your president Biden, that he want to put more solar by 2050. I think I think it's good contribution.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see what the U.S. government does.
Yeah.
Infrastructure spending, and that's uncertain at the moment.
Yeah. But at least the spirit is there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
The directive is there, yeah. Yeah.
It's been a very troubling year for
Yeah.
sort of climate effects, and that might
That's true.
help.
That's true. That's true.
That attention is having an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And including the last flooding in Germany, I think they realized really about this heavy rain in this area. Yeah.
Which they're predicting a lot of in the future for continental Europe.
Yeah.
ICDP report, or not the ICDP, the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC.
Yeah.
Okay, I think our second speaker already come, and then Unica already joined for this Zoom. So Unica, yang akan memberi untuk pembukaan ini saya juga karena Bu Emada kelihatannya nggak ada, ya nggak ada Pak Asep, ada rapat yang lain, jadi nanti yang buka saya dan ya moderator juga saya. Oke, maybe we can start our webinar, please, Unica.
So it's ready for me to. Should I share my screen?
No, we have maybe some speech before, Nick.
I'm so sorry. There's a signal problem, sir.
Yes, you in campus or you in your home, Unica?
I'm at home, sir.
Okay.
Wait a second.
So Unica is our student, Nick.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Actually this webinar we asked our student to manage for the webinar.
I had that experience as a graduate student. We were asked to run seminar series.
So Unica is from the metallurgy study program.
Okay.
I think second level now. Kata 2020 ya Unica itu ya.
Suara saya masih kedengaran ya, suara saya?
Ya.
Oke. Terima kasih.
Oke, gimana Unica?
There is a company profile playing video. Is it necessary, sir? Is it necessary?
I think we are already late for 8 minutes or approximately 10 minutes. I think we can move on directly to the webinar because we have time for the Diagnostalis event at 10.
Okay, let's start. All right. Good morning, everyone who have joined into this webinar today, and may peace be upon us all. Thank you for coming to this international webinar event on this special day, coincide with the second PEPB Bandung Dies Natalis or anniversary. And we wish you a warm welcome to every single one of you in this special event on the occasion of today, especially that we respect the Honorable Dear Director of Polytechnic of Energy and Mining Bandung, Mr. Dr. Asep Roman, STMT. First Deputy Director for Academic Affairs, Mrs. Dr. Mon Imelda Huta Barat, STMT. Third Deputy Director for Students and Alumni Affairs, Mr. Dr. Forrest Edi Yunanto, SHUT MSI. And also the speaker have joined the event today. It is a great honor to welcome you, Professor Nicholas Devatsis from Temple University, USA, and Dr. Iher Ahmad Jumarma Wirakusuma as a PEP lecturer. I am Unica Madapoka Putri, together with Mr. Dr. Forrest Edi Yunanto, SHUT MSI, as the host and moderator of today's event. This event for webinar today, called Insight 5.0, stand for Inspiring Your Perspective Site by PEPB Bandung. In the international webinar Insight PEPB Bandung, which has two topics called Power from the Earth Heat, How Geothermal Energy System Could Improve Our Energy Outlet, and second, could Indonesia's geothermal utility fulfill the future energy demand? And that will answer today's theme, where does Indonesia's enormous geothermal potential has to be directed? And then meanwhile, today's schedules include 1. Video profile screening and opening. Second, the presentation of the materials that is going to be presented by Professor Nicholas De Fatsis from Temple University, USA, and will be continued by Dr. Ir Ahmad Jumarwa Wirakusuma, which is going to be guided by the moderator. And after the presentation is delivered, there will be a 30 minutes question and answer session for each research person. All right, now we have a speech from the Director of Polytechnic of Energy and Mining Bandung by Mr. Dr. Asep Rohman, STMT, to give a remarks. To Mr. Dr. Asep Rohman, time is yours.
Okay, Yunaka, I will representing Pak Asep, because Pak Asep cannot attend this seminar, and also Bu Imelda. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening for Nicholas. PEPB Bandung is proud to present an international webinar in commemoration of the second anniversary of PEPB Bandung. Actually, Indonesia can generate 28 gigawatt of electricity using geothermal power plants. However, Indonesia has not yet fully exploited this potential. Only about 2%, I think, if I'm not wrong, of all potential in Indonesia is actually utilized. In fact, this geothermal power plant has several advantages when compared to coal-fired power plant that have been widely used so far in Indonesia. Actually, we produce approximately 500 million tons in 1 year. Among them is that this power plant does not issue some environmental pollutant material and use renewable fuel, so that it can be an alternative choice in an era where environmental problems are one of the world's main concerns. This geothermal power plant is not without its weakness, actually. The problem, of course, is one of the weaknesses that makes this power plant less used in Indonesia. In addition, the location of the steam reservoir, which is often located in the middle of protected forests, is a problem for those who want to build this power plant. In the future, PEPB Bandung will establish new study program. I think it's already informed to you, Nicholas, about this renewable energy, this geothermal energy. I think we hope Nicholas and all his colleagues willing to help us, PEPB Bandung, establish this study program in the future. Finally, I hope this webinar will give advantage and new idea in managing our geothermal energy in Indonesia. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for the speech from Forest Study Yunanto. Praise gratitude to God Almighty so that we can be present at Zoom today, September 8th, 2021. And therefore, let us also pray to the presence of God Almighty so that the event runs smoothly. All right, to the audience, prior to the main event, let us pray according to our respective beliefs. Okay, praying begins. All right, thank you, everyone. The next event is our core event, which will be hosted by Mr. Forest Study Yunanto, broadly as lecturer as well as Deputy Third Director of Studies of Student and Alumni Field. To Mr. Teddy, please.
Okay, thank you, Yunake, again. Now I was appointing as a moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening for Nicholas again. This time, PEPB webinar will raise the term about the geothermal energy with the main title, Where does Indonesia enormous geothermal potential has to be directed? Currently, there are two speakers who will present material on this webinar. First is Nicholas from Temple University, US. He will present a material entitled Power from the Earth Heat, how geothermal energy system could improve our energy outlook. And the second speaker is Pak Ade Jumarma from PEPB Bandung. He is lecturer in PEPB Bandung. He will present a material entitled Could Geothermal Utility Able to Fulfill the Indonesian Energy Demand in the Future? The first presentation will be delivered by Nicholas for a maximum 15 minutes, Nicholas. Then proceed to the second material by Pak Ade Juma for also approximately 15 minutes. After that, we will proceed to a question and answer session of approximately 20 to 30 minutes. So the participant, please write question in the Q&A chat column with the format, name, origin of the institution, the question for who, maybe for Nicholas or for Pak Ade Juma, and then said what is the question. Maybe I will talk in bahasa also. So untuk para peserta silahkan menanyakan selama diskusi berlangsung ya. Nggak apa-apa dalam bahasa Indonesia yang mungkin nanti akan saya coba translate ya. Saya akan coba translate atau Yuneka coba translate ke bahasa Inggris. Jadi ketika presentasi berlangsung boleh menyampaikan pertanyaannya apa di kolom chat ya, Q&A. Atau mungkin nanti di akhir saya akan mempersilahkan untuk raise hand ya, raise hand untuk bertanya langsung ya. Untuk bertanya langsung jika memang bersedia untuk menanyakan langsung kepada kedua narasumber. Oke, I think to shorten the time, let's start with the first presenter by Nicholas. Please, Nicholas, time is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'll start by bringing up my presentation. All right, thank you very much for this opportunity to present my perspective on geothermal energy resources. I want to greet you good morning. And what I'm going to do is give you a fairly broad perspective on geothermal resources, primarily from the geological perspective, reflecting my work in the structure and mechanics that help us understand how those geothermal systems operate. We'll be looking at this through a series of questions that help us better understand the resource potential. So my background, as you can see here, is in structural geology of fault zones, in their mechanics, and then direct measurements down in boreholes. And you'll see me here on the left at one of the Icelandic geothermal power plants that I've been visited, as well as in Nevada, a geothermal power plant called the Brady's geothermal power plant here on the right. And you see a series of steam fields distributed in a more or less linear fashion along here because they're actually distributed along a fault scarp. And so I'm going to be bringing that geological perspective to understanding the resources. Now, in general, as you may know, economical geothermal systems require a relatively shallow heat source, such as magma in the crust, which might be applicable to Indonesia, or some movement of fluids through preferred steep conduits that reach deep into the earth. And that can transect impermeable formations down into a reservoir of fluid that can then be drawn up to produce, to a power plant to produce energy. And so schematically, we can imagine the arrows depicting the flow in this system. So when we think about a geothermal system, I want you to think about it as having a heat source, that there has to be a transfer fluid that's sufficiently easy to move and sufficiently abundant. And that is the basis for resource extraction. Okay, so when the proper conditions are met, we can economically produce power either through electrical generation, or if the conditions are right, primarily due to societal structure, through direct use in industrial practice or for heating and managing households. Okay, so as I work through my discussion, I'm going to attempt to address 4 fundamental questions. I'm going to describe what the resource is in general on the global scale. I'm going to talk about what is the state of development of the resource and how is that varying across the globe. What are the essential elements of a complete geothermal system that makes it viable for energy production? And what are the impacts of development and resource extraction? So again, I will start very broad and take you through the geological constraints. And at the end, I'll show you a particular application to geothermal systems in the United States. So let's first talk about the Earth's heat and what the resource is. So when we think about the resource, we can first think about the fact that as you go deeper in the Earth, it gets hotter and hotter. And that heat varies by position on the Earth, but in general, it increases all the way towards the center of the Earth at great depth, where the Earth experiences temperatures similar to the surface temperature of the sun. Now that heat is continually moving out towards the Earth's surface. It's flowing towards the Earth's surface, and it's either flowing through conduction, which produces relatively steep temperature gradients, or it's actually moving advectively by being transported with a working fluid that itself is hot, and it's the fluid moving through the crust that delivers temperature to different regions. And that's often driven by a convective flow. Now, this works in juxtaposition to the overall structure, the permeability structure of the Earth. In general, the shallow Earth is much more permeable than the deep Earth. And as we go deeper, you see this exponential decay in permeability, so that when we get deeper, the rock is very, very hot, conduction is going to dominate, and advection of fluids is going to be inhibited. So one thing that we should look at is we can obtain useful geothermal heat from the sources as it's delivered to the Earth, either the flux of the heat, which is overall relatively slow and in most of the Earth is governed by conduction, versus the energy that's accumulated in the crust. And the energy accumulated in the crust is going to be our primary resource. And it turns out it is rather vast. Now, in addition to this depth dependence, the tectonic movement of the plates governs a spatial variation along the Earth's surface and where that heat is available. So I want to draw your attention to the plate tectonic map of the Earth. And what you'll note here is the distribution of earthquakes along plate boundaries and the distribution of volcanoes. And the volcanoes are a good indicator of magmatic heat sources. And earthquakes may, in some cases, be indicators of where there are cracks that facilitate fluid flow and might allow that advective component to have a greater role in bringing heat to the surface and storing it there where we might have access to it, right? So we tend to find the biggest geothermal resources along plate boundaries, especially where there are volcanoes, but not solely in those locations. I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, if we think about plate boundaries, we can also think of those resources as having different temperature profiles with depth because of how they're interacting with the underlying hot material in the Earth. The Earth is layered. It has the outer crust with hotter and hotter rocks as we progress into the mantle below. And at divergent ridges, at mid-ocean ridges, we see the temperature rises very shallowly to very high temperatures to very shallow depths. Whereas at convergent margins, right, we see a lower temperature gradient, so we're accumulating less temperature with depth, but magmatic upwelling will produce local heat sources near volcanoes. And then there are mid-cratonic features like hotspots, Yellowstone being an example in the United States, where there could be very large magma reservoirs producing very large embodied heat at shallow depth. If we look at the state of the installed capacity in the world right now, what you'll see is the United States is actually the biggest producer of geothermal electricity, and actually Indonesia is also a major producer as well. The total electrical generation in the United States is only 4 or 5 gigawatts of electricity. the potential is quite significant and unrealized, as was alluded to earlier. Now, one of the things I want to also draw your attention to here is that I've limited in this figure to discussing what's called hydrothermal systems. And these are very shallow systems, typically less than 3 kilometers deep, where water is near the boiling point or steam is present. And these represent the traditionally developed resources. And this potential right now is limited to those cases. And I also want to draw your attention back to the plate tectonic map that we just saw. And what you will see is, like the plate tectonic boundaries, it's at those boundaries that we have the most developed resources, highlighted in red here, often coinciding with the presence of volcanoes. All right, so what is the state of resource development? So going back, in many cases, economical geothermal systems require this shallow heat source, and that's really what's been exploited to date. And what I want to do now is focus on how that program is progressing. So if we look at the installed capacity of shallow geothermal, we're going to see on the right here the total distribution of capacity to date within the last few years, that the global generation capacity is expected to grow from its current state near or just above 13 gigawatts as of 2015, with a target goal of 32 gigawatts in the 2030s. And of the generating countries, the largest is the United States, followed by Indonesia, the Philippines, Turkey, and New Zealand, all of which have exceeded 1 gigawatt of electrical generating capacity. The graphic shows the current capacity in blue with other planned projects in green, and these are all limited to those hydrothermal systems that have very shallow, very high temperature waters that often naturally manifest as hot springs at the surface. Okay, looking a little bit closer, we can actually see the distribution in the world among countries in terms of capacity, and look at that as a timeline starting in 1975 and progressing to 2020 in the publications of the EIA, okay? And also evident in our world geothermal, our world data, which is available free to use and explore. So you can see overall the generating capacity across the world has been climbing. And that's particularly true if we actually zoom in and look at the specific country outputs here that I'll zoom into. And you'll see Indonesia's rising significantly, along with Turkey more recently, and a steady but slower increase in New Zealand. You'll also notice that in the United States, we had a higher capacity into the 90s, and this represents some work going on in just a few major geothermal fields, like the Co2 geothermal field, which came online in the 90s and is over 200 megawatts of electrical capacity, and some work going on with the geysers. And then subsequent to 2000, it actually dropped off, and then it's rising, but it's rising at a relatively slow rate. Okay, that reduction in the rate and in the United States really reflects a couple of the economic problems that geothermal development can face. So one issue that we see in the United States is the overall energy demand has grown significantly, and the fraction has grown in green shows the growth in the renewable energy capacity. And what we'll see is that we have the majority of the growth taken up by coal in the past, which is significantly falling down, to be replaced in part by renewables, but also greatly by natural gas. And that starts in the mid-2000s. And so what's going on in the United States has been this competition where geothermal systems are mostly available in the western part of the United States in relatively rural areas away from population centers, which makes them a little bit less developable, whereas the vast majority of the population in the United States is on the East Coast, where the energy resource is more restricted. We also saw a surge in natural gas production as massive hydraulic fracturing came online and greatly increased the capacity of the United States to generate natural gas that was distributed by pipelines, and which was put to use using modular power generators that were very good for what we'll call peak matching, which is, in other words, that as the electricity demand varies through the day, you can turn on or off one of these small, easy to start up generators to supply energy. When the demand drops, you can turn it off. And that turns out to be a relatively efficient power management scheme. And then the last issue that geothermal has faced, I think, is that I'll talk about more, is that much like oil and gas, it has a great deal of risk at the early stages of development because drilling wells has a success rate, and some wells drilled do not produce significant electrical generation. Unlike oil and gas, when you get a successful oil and gas well, you can make back the investment on the infrastructure relatively quickly, often in less than a year. In the case of the natural gas wells, that was typically in a 9-month period where you'd make the money back. But with a geothermal power plant, you're actually making that initial investment back over the 30-year lifespan that you financed for development. So you have this risk of development that you associate with oil and gas, but you have this power plant utility management timeline that doesn't give you a quick return on the result. And that is just not a favorable business model in the United States. Okay, so if I break into that renewables part, what you're going to end up seeing is that we've had this bright orange here is this sort of steady rate of geothermal development, and not too dissimilar from Indonesia. It represents about 2% of the US energy demand, with the vast growth going to other resources, primarily wind in the United States and solar, with a nice steady return from hydroelectric, excuse me. Now, what I want to do as I progress into the next part of the talk is talk about the different kinds of resources that are available to us in the United States and how this has actually impacted resource development. So if I think about the United States, the geothermal resources in general, I can think about the depth of the resource. So how deep do I have to go to access the temperature that's sufficient to generate power? We're going to treat a sufficient temperature for power generation to typically be, for electrical generation, typically exceed 150 degrees Celsius to 200 degrees Celsius. And then because energy use is highly dependent on its quality, which is highly dependent on its concentration, we're going to see a variation in how we can apply that energy resource. So for resources that are less than 120 degrees Celsius, what we're going to typically find is what we can use is we can use the heat from those systems for direct uses, basically heating things up. The energy is too diffuse to really effectively generate electricity. We can use binary power plant technology starting at around a little over 100 degrees C, but really doing better at 150 degrees C, where we transfer heat from a steam or a water into a highly expandable fluid that would then be used to spin a turbine and then re-inject the water back into the reservoir. And that's what's called a binary system. At higher temperature, we can allow the water to flash to steam, and that large expansion that goes with the phase transformation can be used to generate electricity. And you'll see in those cases, we're getting close to the boiling point curve of water, which increases with depth due to the increasing pressure of a static column of water above it. Okay, so we have everything from very shallow uses where we're directly using the earth as a moderate heat source or a heat battery for heat pumps, to deeper hydrothermal systems, typically 1 to 3 kilometers depth, where we're looking for 150 to maybe 300 or 350 degrees C in the extreme. And then at the very base of this system, we have these two regions. One's called hot sedimentary basins. These are basins that are heated up as part of the oil and gas maturation process. Or if they're above large granitic cratons, they may be heated up by long-term decay of radioactive elements in those granitic cratons. This is very common in Australia, for instance. But the really big resource is at great depths greater than 3 kilometers. They can be at very high temperatures and what I'm going to call the EGS system. These are systems that are very deep, and they're so deep that pressures are really high, and that high pressure increases the confining and reduces the permeability that we saw. And so there's lots and lots of heat, but there may or may not be much water, and it's very hard to make the water flow. And without the water flowing, it becomes difficult to bring that heat to the surface to a power plant. And so we see these different types of resources. To date, most of what we're making use of in the United States either fits into that binary category or the flash category. So let's look at where these different grades of resources are. And remember, the two critical attributes are going to be temperature and depth. So if I turn to a map of the United States and I use temperature as my primary guide for where resources are, what we'll see is if we're in the Western United States over large volumes of rock, we have relatively high temperatures above 150 C, which means they're amenable to binary electrical generation. So that's true all around here. This hotspot here is the Yellowstone, and then there are many areas in Nevada, even at this low resolution. As we progress to greater depth, around 6.5 kilometers, the whole west from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the coast shows temperature sufficient for really significant electrical generation. And since the amount of volume, right, the amount of mass times its heat content represents the electrical resource, this indicates there's a massive resource available. It's only when we get to really great depths, greater than 6.5 to 10 kilometers, that we start to see the East Coast, where the vast majority of people in the United States live, increase in temperature. And so this sets up a couple takeaway messages that I want to use to help guide us through the rest of the talk. First, there is clearly a vast potential of stored heat available in the crust, but it's often deep, where the geology will be create difficulties like low permeability, where the pressures are very, very high that make it difficult to drill wells. And the low permeability and that difficult in drilling makes it very difficult to bring that heat to the surface to a power plant using a working fluid to generate electrical energy. Okay, so one of the questions is going to be are these issues, can they be overcome through an engineering practice, through improved drilling technologies or through technologies that introduce permeability, pore space to store fluids and fluids into the crust so that we can capture that heat and transport it towards the surface. And these are some of the big challenges. So again, we have problems with where is the resource relative to the population. We've got problems with financing structure. The deeper we go, the more risk there is, the higher the capital investment early on compared to the payout. And we have this issue of, the engineering problems that we have to address. Okay. Okay, so let's take one last look at this and just really think about what is the scale of the resource. So one of the ways this is measured is to think about the amount of energy in terms of in joules, where let's talk about exojoules, where 1 exojoule is around 2.778 times 10 to the 8 megawatt hours of energy. The total US consumption in 2005 was about 100 exojoules, right? So if we think about the energy resource in place, and we think about the whole range, given the uncertainties we have in temperature with depth, because we're modeling it from surface observations, a very conservative case at 2% says there's 2.8 times 10 to the 5th exojoules. A mid-range to upper range case is 2.8 to 5.6 times 10 to the 6 exojoules of resource that we think could be recoverable if we can deal with these engineering issues of drilling and introducing permeability. The overall resource base, which we're not sure that we could transport to the surface, is massive. It's 14 times 10 to the 6 exojoules. And that's the stored thermal capacity that we want to think about that exists between 3 and 10 kilometers. Another way to look at this, and one of the ways I like to think about this, is thinking about this in terms of the geothermal gradient, so how temperature increases with depth. a high geothermal gradient is shown here. You'll see that at around 10 kilometers, you're going to be reaching 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. Moderate, which is very common in the West over large volumes, it reaches at 10 kilometers, 300 degrees Celsius. And then there's the average cratonic gradient, which is evident in the eastern part of the United States, which only gets you to around 200 degrees C at 10 kilometers. So those are relatively unfavorable conditions. Now, these conditions are what we sort of average over very, very large volumes. We also have the hydrothermal systems, which in very narrow volumes may reach very high temperature because of the focusing of fluid flow that brings heat to the surface very rapidly. And this is all juxtaposed against the fact that permeability is decreasing the deeper we go into the earth, making it harder to move water around to capture and transport heat. And I want to juxtapose that against one of the biggest issues, which is the financing that goes into drilling the deeper wells. As we drill deeper, the cost of a well, shown here on a logarithmic scale, increases very, very rapidly. And geothermal wells in particular suffer from the fact that they have to be drilled in relatively large boreholes because we need a high flux of water to transport heat, because the amount of energy per unit volume of water, as say compared to gas or oil, is relatively small. So we need a high flux rate to supply that geothermal power plant, which means we need a large well bore so that there's not too much resistance along the pipe provided by the well. And so this significant increase in cost with depth is one of the major issues that needs to be thought about if we're thinking about, can we take full advantage of the resource that could be available? Okay, so now I want to pivot from this very large perspective on what is the resource base, how big is it, and how much of it's developed, to really thinking about the components of these hydrothermal systems, and then extending that through to these potential EGS systems. Okay, so what are the essential elements of a complete geothermal system? Well, we have said that we have to have a heat source. There has to be some sort of permeability that connects the heat source, say, along a conduit. So consider this heat source in this bright red area. It's got to transport along a permeable, persistently permeable conduit to some shallow reservoir that we can effectively drill to. That reservoir has to be sufficiently extensive so that it's full of a significant amount of water and heat, and we can use that water to draw the heat to the well and bring it to a power plant. So we need a porous reservoir of some minimum size, and we need that water to be sustainable. So we need some sort of effective level of saturation, but also a recharge. And if we prospect for a geothermal system and we want to think if it's developable, we have to assure ourselves that all four of these components are available to complete the system and allow us to develop it. Now, those systems may look different in different regions. And so one of the starting points is understanding what your resource type is. So in the United States, most of our resources are located out west. And I'm going to argue that one of the reasons for this is the area where we have extensive, very active faulting and relatively recent volcanism. And we can think of some of our geothermal resources as falling into one of these three types. The upper one is most relatable to Indonesia. So we have magmatic intrusions, in this case over an extending crust that supplies volcanoes. It may have shallow reservoirs, diking, or magma chambers. We may also have batholithic intrusions, potentially abundant in radioactive elements. Okay, and these then support conductive heat transfer to the surface. But more importantly, the active faulting means we have a potentially permeable conduit that reaches down towards these heat sources and allows water to maybe circulate using those breaks in the earth towards shallow depths where there could be a reservoir. Maybe it's a fractured reservoir, maybe it's a porous sedimentary volume. And that's one of the systems that we might consider. On the other extent, we have simple systems where we've simply broken the earth through extensional faulting, and that's overall thinned the crust. And these faults reach relatively deep. and they interact with the upper mantle to allow heat to circulate back to the surface. And in fact, if I were to look at the United States, these two systems are pretty apparent. You've got batholithic intrusions and lots of volcanisms distributed along the western edge of the basin and range, and up into the Cascade Range, which is a convergent margin like Indonesia. And we see lots of specific geothermal fields. These are a couple examples that I've worked on: the Brady and the Desert Peak fields, the Kosa geothermal field with 200 to 300 megawatts of electrical generation, some major volcanoes in the northwestern United States. What we see less of in the United States, but for instance is evident in Australia, is these where you have these very old granitic intrusions, and they're radiogenically creating heat that is trapped underneath some sort of thermal blanket. So the critical thing here is that knowing what kinds of resources are available, we can design tools to find them, and we can think about how we would exploit them. So let me explore a little bit what's going on in my particular area of expertise with the role of faulting in supporting geothermal systems as a critical component, providing a conduit and potentially providing the reservoir parts of the geothermal resource, and also how that might inform us about the possibility of enhanced geothermal resources in regions that are not naturally permeable. So if I look at an example from the Kosa geothermal field, and I go out into the field and I map it, what I will often see is fractures, and those fractures have multiple layers of precipitated cement. And what we believe is happening there, much like an ore deposit, this fracture is active over a long time, and it cracks and water flows into it, and that water interacts with the surrounding rock, altering that rock, and it undergoes temperature and pressure changes that causes the precipitation of new minerals that will eventually seal that away, healing the fracture. But once that fracture is introduced, it's a weak spot that can be exploited. If deformation continues, it can crack open again and lead to layers and layers of cement. But most importantly, it could provide a persistent pathway for fluid flow over a longer geological time. And in fact, if we zoom out, we often see fault zones where steam or water is emanating directly from fractures next to a major fault in the surrounding rock that's damaged. And we'll see along young fault scarps. So here we have a alluvial fan that comes down, and it's actually broken by slip on a quaternary fault. And along that fault, we see a series of hydrothermal vents and fumaroles, preferentially along the trace of that fault, telling us that fault has a role to play in bringing hot fluid to the surface to create these hydrothermal features. And if we look more broadly over the entire Western United States, we would find that if we look at where hot springs occur and compare the frequency of their occurrence to their distance from a fault, that there is clearly a spatial association where hot springs are most frequently occur along the traces of faults. Okay, so what's happening here is the fault itself is acting as that persistent conduit, may or may not be able to also act as the reservoir of a larger volume of fluid that we could draw into wells to support a power plant. But the story is a little bit more complicated, and it's one of the things that I think contributes to the relatively low success rate of drilling wells that has a huge financial impact on whether or not geothermal can be commercially developed. And the issue is that not all parts of the fault are permeable. So if we go a little bit deeper and we think about where those hot springs occur along what appears to be an active fault, what we would find is that most of them occur near the margins or the tips of the mapped fault, not along its entire trace. That's a relatively small wedge, but along the tips, and especially areas where multiple fault segments come close together. Now, Micklethwaite and Cox, among others, have shown that this is also true of ore deposits. And I like to think of ore deposits as ancient dead geothermal systems, whereas geothermal systems as newly developing ore deposits. Now, what they showed is that when a fault slips, the slip goes along the entire plane of the fault, but it has to end at the fault's edge. And where it ends, it really distorts the rock around it, adding stress into that system, which can potentially promote dilation. In this case, what they showed is that where slip, if I looked at from one tip to the other, and I looked at the variation in slip that goes from 0 at the tip along the strike slip fault to a maximum towards the center, then dips again towards the end of one segment, then picks up again on another segment, and then goes back to 0. So that would be this segment in the north, this lobe, and this segment shown in white in the south. When those slip, they interact, and that's why there's the dip in displacement. But what happens when you come to the edge is that they're distorting that rock around them. And that pattern of distortion, if I look on it, is also circumscribes the gold deposits, which in this case require vast amounts of fluid to flow through to accumulate. So this is one way to explain this very simple statistics that only small portions of faults or regions around small portions of faults are very good conduits or persistent conduits. And we have to understand potentially that structure to try and inform where wells are likely to intersect permeable zones of upwelling hot water. And if we fail to do that, that could be a reason why we have a higher fail rate in geothermal drilling. If we zoom back out with this perspective and we look at a more detailed view of the geothermal resource in the Western United States, what we're going to find is that the power plants that we see that are actively developed are represented by these black circles. And if we look at the favorability based on known temperature, hydrothermal systems, and also influenced by this new understanding of faults, what we'll see is that these power plants are preferentially developed in areas with very active deformation rates revealed by things like GPS and seismicity, that they are along the structural features that make the basin and range here, which I alluded to in my earlier figure. Showing here, this is the basin and range region where the ranges are bounded by faults and have extensive basins, as shown in the cross section here by Mock and Beerson. Okay, so there is a potential to take advantage of this geological constraint to better inform how we understand where we should site successful wells. Unfortunately, a downside of that is those highly fractured and stressed regions are also more challenging drill conditions. So there's always a juxtaposition. So to bring this back together, what I want to say is that the approach to characterizing resource is going to depend on the type of resource you think you have, taking into account the complete geothermal system. You have to be able to account for the heat source, the features that are allowing that heat to be transported to a region you can capture it, someplace that it's stored with enough saturation that you can interact with it through a well, and that provides a heat exchanger for your development. In the cases that I've looked at, the fault is a critical piece of that puzzle, providing the conduit, bringing hot fluids closer to access, and also potentially contributing to the overall storage and acting as a heat exchanger that you can interact with to pull heat out of the rock into a working fluid and then up to the surface power plant. Okay, so the goal that I think this leads us to is that we should think about exploiting these geomechanical concepts related to the role of faults, how they might dilate as they slip and crack apart the rock, due to stresses in the rock that maintain and produce porosity and permeability to support the reservoir. And we can use that to better inform our practice. I think this also leads to a couple critical opportunities and challenges that I want to make sure to summarize. So knowing that we have, a wide variation in broad geothermal gradients from high that give us good potential to low, consistent with much of the cratonic interiors, the interiors of continents and plates away from their boundaries. And also these very localized resources, which are challenging to site wells at. And the problem that as we go deeper, it gets more challenging to drill wells and the wells tend to encounter low permeability even when they drill into hot rock. What can we see as the next steps? So here's what I think the opportunities are. First is, as has been alluded to, this is a vast resource. This is an incredible amount of stored energy. And the question becomes, can we access it? Now, if we can access it, a point that I want to make is it could provide what I call base load power for peak matching. I alluded to one of the challenges we faced in running power plants is that the generation of electricity has to match the demand so that the overall system stays in balance. With geothermal systems, there is the potential to vary the flow rate from wells so that you can ramp up or decrease overall electrical production to help match these peaks. And this is a direct contrast to other renewables where the variability of wind speed or the variability of solar insolation is not something you control and creates some problems for the operator trying to deliver energy to a customer. The other thing I wanted to deal with in my next segment is some of the environmental impact issues. And what I'm going to point out is that geothermal has a relatively small footprint compared to many other power generation technologies. It has negligible emissions, including CO2 production. Now, the technical development challenges I think that we have are related to siting wells. What we've seen is that in hydrothermal systems, that coincidence of high permeability, high porosity, saturation, and heat can be very, very localized. And that leads to a lot of failed wells and a lot of lost funds, okay? So those temperature variations are complex with depth. There's variable permeability, and then the deeper we drill, actually, the harder it gets because we're more removed from knowledge of the target. The other thing I pointed out is that drilling is expensive, that large diameter boreholes that are required for geothermal production, they drill slowly. They start out very, very large, as you see here, with exterior diameters of 26 degrees at the surface, and even at great depth, at least 8.5 inches in diameter. And that overall slows down the drilling process. Temperature goes up, pressure goes up, you wear out bits more quickly and you have to exchange them. And that all increases the cost of drilling. And in many regions, you've got drillers who are trained for oil and gas, but they're not trained for the geothermal environment, and that can lead to other delays. And then finally, there are management problems and environmental risks that I'm going to touch on. So, what's going on with these fluids that are high temperature and may have a lot of dissolved materials in them? They could be very chemically reactive, and in fact, they often are. What about long-term fluid management? Are there pressure drawdown issues, water table issues? How much water are we using? Do we have to worry about contaminating drinking water sources? If we're moving lots of water around in the earth, how does that influence the potential for these faults to be active through earthquakes? Or could there be subsidence if we draw away fluid? Can the earth settle? So I want to address those issues directly and in the next section, where we're going to ask, what are the impacts of development and resource extraction? What are the benefits? What are the potential pitfalls? And are there things we can do to manage them? All right. So the general benefits I've alluded to is this idea of a baseload energy that we can potentially, once we have a well up and running, we have some control over output, which is very useful to utilities in delivering electricity to match electrical demand. I'm also going to argue that the overall environmental input is pretty small. One way to look at this is, let's look at a power plant in the United States. This is part of the Co2 geothermal power plant that has typically generated between 200 and 270 megawatts over the last 30 years. So you see the footprint here is developed with a few well sites. Here's the mud pit, the drill site. There's some piping on the surface. The wells obviously go down into the ground. In this area, they go from 1 to about just over 3 kilometers in depth. And then these pipes then send fluid to a power plant that then generates the electricity. In this case, there are multiple power plants in the system. If you look at the overall satellite image, each of these black dots is a well pad with a well that is producing some volume of water and delivering it to a power plant. This image shows a well test from one of these sites, one of the early wells in the field, just producing simple steam. Okay, so the overall footprint here and the disturbance of the land is really provided by just a few elements, right? The roads and the well pads and a small power plant. So it's a relatively small industrial footprint. Okay. Other general limitations related to this is that all this infrastructure costs money. So there's a long initial investment that's related to the drilling costs, the site preparation, and if this site is far removed because it's governed by where the geology tells us the resource is, not where the user is, we may have to pay for power line development, and power lines themselves can be hard to pay for. Aside from that, there's also costs related to exploration, and if we need to do some sort of enhancement, that work as well to help maintain or make the system sufficiently permeable for energy production. So we have a lot of early investment with a very long payout that I think is difficult to manage. All right, so let's look at the infrastructure a little bit more closely. Any particular power plant has to have a water intake. We're pulling water out of the ground. That has to go someplace, so eventually it's going to go back into the ground. We want to do that strategically so that we can use that pressure to keep support up at that well. Again, that's getting the geology right. And we want to do that with a sufficiently long path. We have to do it just right so that we don't overtly cool this well by piping the water directly into it. We want it to take a long, tortuous path to this well so that they're sufficiently distant to make that work. The water that comes out goes to the power plant. Could be a traditional flash steam. It could be a binary system. The power spins a turbine that then generates electricity and then has to be delivered to a set of power lines that take it to the customer. So what do we have? We have the power plant at the surface, we have power lines, we have roads. Those are all surfaces. In many cases, if there are hydrothermal features at the surface, some of these are protected cultural sites that actually limits where we can develop. And then we have location and terrain limitations. So two of the big limitations in the United States that I want to allude to is that some areas, like in the Cascade Mountains in northwestern United States, have very, very steep terrain and very high elevations. And so those make it difficult to develop good roads, to get infrastructure in place. And the snow is quite heavy at high elevations, which makes it hard to work for 6 or 7 months at a year above certain critical elevations. So that's one example of a terrain problem. Another example of a terrain problem is throughout Nevada, and I'll allude to this a little bit more. You're gonna want to think about how you manage water. Groundwater resources are very critical in these arid environments. And so how we use water and how we protect water resources for cultural purposes, like drinking water, is critically important. We're on a water limited system. So even more than CO2 management, we want to think about water management as a critical impact. And then the issue also becomes is where is this resource relative to a population? So what is my cost of transmission? And is there an actual direct use that we could use if it's a cold area for district heating? Is the population set up for that like it is in Europe? The United States, it typically isn't. Is there an industrial purpose that we can put that diffuse heat to? When we look at that overall comparison of how the surface disturbance for geothermal compares to other energy resources, what I think you would see is we look at the overall land use in terms of the meters squared per megawatt hour of generation. Coal and solar and photovoltaics typically have a relatively large surface footprint for large scale power plant production where we're talking tens or hundreds of megawatts of electrical generation. Wind can be interspersed with things with the towers. It's a little bit less disturbing, but when we look at the overall footprint of geothermal, it's actually quite small. It's just that power plant, those roads, and those well sites. The overall land disturbance is small. Unlike coal, for instance, we don't have the big coal extraction that creates a huge land disturbance that's folded into that very high coal number. We We don't have this very large array of photovoltaics that we need for utility scale power generation. So all those things come in. I alluded to the environmental impact of water management. How we complete a well turns out to be a very important issue. It's an entire talk in itself. We're in a high temperature environment where there could be dissolved CO2, dissolved hydrogen and sulfur that could be corrosive, and that's going to interact with the casing and the cement. So we have to be very careful about how we complete a well so that it's isolated from shallow systems and only gains access to the reservoir that we want to interact with at some critical depth. If we look overall at waste production.
5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay.
How much?
5 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, I misread my clock. The CO2 emissions for geothermal are actually relatively small, okay, relative to other production, and it overlaps the region we would typically see in a volcanic area where some of these resources are. Now, water management ends up being an interesting story. So we think about how water naturally recharges and circulates. Here we're looking at an example of overall power generation from 1950 to 1994 in flow rate at Largarello in Italy. And what you'll see is very rapid power generation that tailed off over time. What changed in this region is when they began re-injecting strategically into the reservoir, and that additional fluid ended up allowing them to circulate more energy through to production wells and sweep heat for production. And that's an example of how to use water efficiently. A similar example is available in the United States when we look at the geysers geothermal field, where we look at how things are developing over time compared to the seismicity count. And what we are over time compared to production. So here what we have is steam production over time, and it peaked in the mid 80s, and then it began to decline. In response to that, Calpine started a very careful process of injecting water, and they worked with the city of Santa Rosa to use some of their municipal wastewater as injection. And that stemmed the decline in steam production so that power production stayed significant. The unintended consequence of that, which is the last of the major environmental impacts I'm going to cover, is that re-injecting that water into a system that had been drawn down triggered a series of earthquakes. And so what you see in curves in blue for 2.5 megawatt, in green for 2 megawatt or 2 magnitude 2 earthquakes, and in black for earthquakes greater than magnitude 1.5, is an overall increase in the rate of seismicity as an unintended consequence of that process. Okay, so these are important issues that we need to consider as we work through and think about the process of electrical generation and its impacts. And I think for the purposes of this talk, that's where I'd like to end. We have a pretty good handle on what the impacts are. We know what the big challenges are, and there's a growing body of work specifically focused on this EGS topic that's looking into how do we use the geomechanics and the natural fracture properties of these systems to address increasing the resource capture into new regions, which represent at great depth and higher temperature a much larger resource than has been captured to date from traditional shallow hot hydrothermal systems.
Okay, you have finished your presentation, Nick?
Yeah, I think that's a good, I had 1 or 2 more slides, but I think that's a good place to stop given our time constraints.
Okay. Thank you, Nick, for your presentation. Maybe I will make some summarize for your presentation. Okay, first is Earth is full of energy in the form of heat. So I think we can utilize this energy to become the electrical energy. And then the geothermal system require heat and transfer fluid for economical geothermal energy extraction. And then the third one, I think it's related with my expertise in the environmental issue. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there is environmental impact, yeah, in the geothermal energy system of in the development of this energy geothermal system. Okay, thank you, Nick, for your presentation. I think we will continue to the second presentation. Pak Ade Juma, are you ready for the next presentation?
Okay.
Before you start the presentation, maybe I will briefly inform about your CP, ya, Pak Ade.
Okay.
So Pak Ade is, his bachelor degree is from ITB, and then he continue to Tsukuba, Japan. It is correct, Pak Ade, ya?
Yes,
For
yes.
the master,
Okay.
and then the PhD in the Wellington University in New Zealand. Yeah, actually, Pak Ade is a former director of volcanology and the head center of in the Geology Bureau MER. Before he lectured in PEPB Bandung, he also lectured in PEP Apamigas in Cepu. So Pak Ade, time is yours, and then a maximum 50 minutes.
50.
50 minutes, 50 menit.
Okay. Okay, let's enlarge this one. All right. So this is the title of the my presentation. Where is it? Yeah, what Indonesia? What Indonesia? What is lost? Okay. Well, okay. To fulfill the energy demand in the country for the future. That's the title. So we start from the, where is it?
The slide is not moved yet, Pak Ade.
Yeah, this is I don't know why. Oh, escape. Aduh, bahaya ini. Kenapa ya? Okay. So this is the content of the explanation. So the first one is introduction. The second one is geothermal energy potential in Indonesia. And the third one is some problems in carrying on geothermal utilization in Indonesia. That the energy master plan, regulation and policy, government initiative, and the last one is the conclusion. So now the introduction. So I think everybody knows that there are very highly inhabitant growth in Indonesia. I'll show the figure of that. And then there's a very highly increasing in energy demand also in Indonesia. So Indonesia has a huge geothermal energy potential. I'll show you the figure also. Then Indonesian government then built a master plan target in sector of geothermal energy utilization. That's later on, and then also Indonesian government also built regulations, national standards, and also policy. And of course, we have to consistent with the above master plan, regulation, and policy. Of course, also there is some also plus the government initiative. That's the new one. So to push the motivation to the geothermal exertion in Indonesia. So the strategy is we have to push all of the involved sectors to success this government target through national concern. Okay, let me show you this one. According to the inhabitant numbers in the world, it is increasing very, very high. Not only the linear, line, but also it is actually exponential. If you see like this one, from the year of 1000, and then in 900, and then 900, it is about 1.6. This is billion, not million. 1.6 billion, and then in 2003 became 6.3 billion people, and then in 2025 the world inhabitant can reach 8 billion people. Okay, then also from the energy demand, it is also increase, not only linear increasing, but also in exponential like this, because this is very short. It is in 5 years, and this is 10 years. What happened in Indonesia like this? This is the inhabitant in Indonesia. This is 900, about 40 million people. In 71, it is about 119 people, and then 2010, it is 237 million people. Million people. It is approaching, but from statistic, about in 2035, maybe it will be about 300 people, 300,000 people, 300 million people. That's right. So what happened with the energy demand on electricity? If it is data from the Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry. This is the gigawatt electric, and then but this is the year, and so the line in increasing is also line exponential. So the energy here in the world, and including in Indonesia, is really very high and increasing. Let me show you this one. So let me get into the geothermal. So why is the geothermal important in Indonesia? I think I can show you that the geothermal, the first one, geothermal energy is a clean energy. And then the second one is geothermal is a renewable energy. And the third one, energy has a huge, Indonesia has a huge potential resources in geothermal energy. And also Indonesia is still low in using geothermal resources for utilizing daily energy, as Pak Teddy also emphasized this morning in the opening remark. Okay, now this is the about the total now is now there's the new data that the total installed capacity in Indonesia is now 2,001 almost 2.2 megawatt. 2.2 thousand megawatt, 2,175 megawatt, and the total potential is 23.7. It was about 28.5 megawatt, but after real estimated about the total potential energy potential energy for geothermal is now 23.7. It is according to the Badan Geologi or Geological Agency of Indonesia. Java is the highest potential here in production. It is about 1,250 megawatt as the installed capacity. And Sumatra is actually the total is potential about 9,500 something, and it is about 789 installed capacity now. Okay, that's there. So with this Indonesia in the top 10 high potential of geothermal system in Indonesia in the world. So now Indonesia is the second number after United States. Now is 2,175 installed capacity, and the potential, what is it, the geothermal potential is about 23,755 megawatts. Okay, so that's the introduction. Now we can go to the geothermal energy potential in Indonesia. So we had so many geothermal manifestation in many places. There are many volcanoes in Indonesia. So there's fumarole and solfataras, steaming ground, and then also hot soil and altered rock and geysers and many things. There's about 10 classification of the manifestation for geothermal field in the field, and so this is the examples of the some geothermal manifestation. So this is the map of geothermal field distribution in Indonesia. Sumatra also many places here, many points here. This is Java, and then Kalimantan. This is the with the circle one here, the blue circle here. It is the geothermal energy from non-volcanic resources, and this is volcanic resources. So this one, and this one. It should be like this. So the circle should be circle this one. So non-volcanic geothermal fields, and the other is non-geothermal field is about 20%, and the most number of the geothermal field is about 80%. It is related with the volcanic in Indonesia. So that's the geothermal field distribution, and then from there. Indonesia made it is the mechanism of the survey of the geothermal development. So the first one is, we call it as reconnaissance. So reconnaissance is just only reference study and then geological and geochemical mapping, but it is really very early, plotting geothermal manifestations like such as fumarole, steaming ground, hot water, warm soil, and so on into the map. This is recognizing, and then continue to the what we call it as continuous and early survey. It is a bit detail from the number one. See, this is of course surface geology, geochemistry. I would call it as 3G, but geological survey here we are using remote sensing and so on, and surface geological mapping, but it is more detailed than the last one. The geochemical survey consists of visual observation, water sampling, analysis them chemically in the laboratory, and then also the systematic gas and oil sampling, systematically, of course, yeah. And then this will produce map of chemical element anomaly, and then also a geophysical survey. Like geophysics is gravity and geomagnet. It is early survey. Then number 3, it is a detailed survey. It is integrated from the 3G drilling, and then we start with the geothermal drilling. Drilling for geothermal gradient purposes is so, and then also mapping of the altered rock, also detailed geological mapping, then detailed geochemical, and also physical characteristics of rock. Okay, let me show you this. This is during the geological mapping. Usually geological mapping, this is the FRS rocks here, but also we found some many altered rock, but also we mapped the altered rock itself. And it's for geophysical, geoelectric, and then the gravity, and this is for chemical, just measuring the pH, temperature, and so on, and then for the from the hot spring. And then from the number 3, so we continue to number 4. This is what we call it as exploration drilling or Wildcat. The aim is to indicate if the integrated survey has confirmed so that the geological features, physical data, chemical data below surface, including the quality and quantity, are understandable. That's the aim of the exploration drilling or Wildcat. And then after that, we can continue to the pre-feasibility study. This is investigation on geothermal potential based on earth science and electricity as the basic for the development, the next step. It is also important. And then delineation drilling. It is added exploration drilling from here to obtain the data geology, physics, and chemistry of the reservoir and potential of well at the geothermal area. And then from here, we reach the feasibility study. So from feasibility study, it is to study on electricity and also to evaluate the reservoir, to judge if the geothermal field is feasible to be developed or not. So with this, if it is feasible, is completed by a plan of production well techniques and electricity power plant system and so on. Then if it is okay, and then we can continue to development drilling. Production and injection wells, it is should be concerned to reach the target of production capacity. In this step, we well test to all wells. It is conducted to know the production capacity. And finally, geothermal use. So it can use directed use or indirect use. Direct use for non-electric use, but for indirect use is for it can be used for electric power plant use. This is an example for the exploration drilling Wildcat. It is a photo from the geological agency, and there are many photos of this. And one of them is success to produce the steam here. This is good, and then so we have to direct the steam to the all direction to save everyone here to work on the stage. And then from that, so we can we have to make some model geothermal system. This is an example in Jaboy in Aceh, in Sabang Island. This is the there are some this is the fault here, and then the fault here between the two faults. This is the there are some cap rock here, and then this is the reservoir. So this is the model like this, and this is the heat source from here, and this is the rock hot rock here, and then to heat the the environment like this here, and then finally to hit this reservoir. And this one is really expected to figure out how what the situation in the ground here, and then if it is okay, and the data is very good, so we can develop into the next step. We can plan which one in which location we can install for the well to drill, if it is either one of the production well or exploration well, and then including to plan about the pre-injection well. All right. So if it is according to the geothermal position potential system, and we in Indonesia, it is based on the Indonesian national standard in Indonesia. So there are two geothermal potential classification. The first one is resources, and the second one is reserve. For the resources, we have speculative resources. In Indonesia, the sumber daya spekulatif, and then hypothetical resources, which is sumber daya hypothetic in Indonesia. But in the first, it is really parallel with the mechanism, what kind of survey we have to do during the geothermal survey. So this is in the speculative. It is parallel with the reconnaissance. It is energy potential of this class is estimated by observing geological condition and also estimated reservoir temperature. This is when you're comparing from this the place of we are surveying at, and then we have to compare with some other places, and then we can know the reservoir temperature. And then the second one is hypothetical resources. It is a bit detailed, but still general if we will compare to the next steps, the next resources classification, potential classification. Then this is the estimate by observing geological condition, geochemical and geophysics measurement, and to figure out the lateral and vertical shape of the estimate on and then also the reservoir temperature. And in the possible reserve, we get the energy potential estimated on the basis of the detailed survey of geology 3G, and then geothermal gradient well, and then so that model can be estimated. A model can be estimated, as I show you there on one of the figure, and also the dimension of the reservoir, and then also fluid characteristic, and then also the lithology of the reservoir can be estimated. And then from here, if it is okay, can be developed into the higher classification, what we call it as probable reserves, cadangan terduga. We call it cadangan terduga in Indonesian bahasa Indonesia. The energy potential is here in estimated on the basis of detailed survey geology and also geothermal gradient well, and at least one exploration well. So at least one exploration well that so that the geothermal model can be proved and the dimension, fluid characteristic, lithology, and also can be estimated. This is the probable, and then that's why the feasibility study, and then finally the development wells. It is now between this and this proven reserves. So the energy potential estimated on the basis of is also the same with this, but the plus at least 3 exploration well. So we have 2 exploration well. This is, and one of which is a success to flowing up the well. So like in the figure, the well, and there is a steam comes out, and that's one of the characteristic or the figure that it is a success. Then from proven reserve, and then also from the what is this the feasibility study. So in the feasibility study also we have to plan about the all infrastructures. It is about the where is the separator, and then silencer, and then piping, and then the generator, and yeah, and then also cooling tower, then the what's this, condenser. So that's we have to plan where they are positioned or located, and of course from here. This is the example in the wayang window at the south of Bandung. Well, and then we can also plan what kind of system in the power plant installation scheme. As we know, this is the plant installation scheme for dry system. So just the steam comes out from the below ground and then directly to the turbine, because without any separator, because this is really almost 100% steam, so we don't need the separator here, so to separate the water and steam. So like the turbine, and then this is go to the generator, and then from here the steam comes to the condenser. From condenser is pumped up to the cooling water, and finally producing the cool water, and cool water again to re-injection to the ground. So this is an example for Kamojang geothermal fields here. And then the second one, for example, I just saw just 4 from about 7 systems. So this is in general, and this is the power plant system scheme in 2 phases. There is water and steam. So water and steam is separated here in the separator, and the steam comes to the turbine. Of course, before coming to the turbine, there is some filters here to protect liquid which come into the turbine is really just H2O or just steam. And then from here to condenser, and it is the same like the first one, and to the cooling tower, and then to re-injection well. Actually, there is also from here, this, there is a brine here, and brine also here is like in Dieng geothermal field. It is also using the like that. Another system we call it power plant installation for multi-flash system. So that is the high pressure and low pressure, and then to the generators, and finally there are some brine here. And the fourth number is electricity power plant for binary cycle system, like Professor Nicholas told and said that there are some binary cycle system here and work, and then usually in the United States, and using the binary cycle system here, it is also applied in Sarula and in North Sumatra island in Indonesia, like this. So this is the four binary cycle system. All right. From there, so we just conclude. We just summarize from all of places in Indonesia. So there's in Sumatra Utara or North Sumatra here, this one, and then also there's another one. Sarula it's here, and there's also Sibayak about 12 megawatts, and then in this is the West Sumatra, Muara Labu, about 85 megawatts, and then production, and then in Lumut Balai, this is in the South Sumatra province, also in Lampung about 220 megawatts, in Ulubelu, and then we go to Java. The Java is this is Java, West Java here, and there's Pangalengan, Wayang Windu, Patuha, Karaha. So Wayang Windu, Patuha, Kamojang, and Darajat, those four geothermal energy are located in South Bandung Regency. Karaha is in Tasikmalaya, and then we go to the in Central Java. We can also had Dieng volcano. It is about 60 megawatts. There's a plan to expand to be 245 megawatts. At the moment here, it is really very good for education. There are many things happens here in Dieng, because Dieng is very everybody knows that here in Dieng there are scaling here, that very high scaling here, but maybe the production is not very good for commercial, but it is really very good for education. So universities usually send some students to come to Dieng because there are many aspects here about geothermal here. Then the Kamojang Darajat and this Gunung Salak. Oh yeah, in West Java, there's Gunung Salak. And then go to Flores. Timor, Flores, and Flores Island. So we have Ulumbu and Mataloco. Ulumbu is about 10 megawatt, and Mataloco is 2.5. Will be expanded for Ulumbu to be 40 megawatt, and also the same for the Mataloco will be expanded to be 40 megawatt. There's another one here, this one in North Sulawesi. It is Lahendong Tumpaso. It is about 120 megawatts, and which will be expense for another 95, not to be. This is also another 40 megawatts here, and this is also another 95 megawatts. Okay, that's the location. So for the from the table, we can see also here Aceh, and then until Lampung, Aceh for the north of Sumatra, until Lampung of the north of Sumatra. This is from according to the islands. This is Sumatra, this is Java and Bali, this is Kalimantan, North Sulawesi, Maluku. Usually, in West and in Java, it is almost 100% related to the volcano, volcanic activity or volcanic resources. But in the if we go to the southeast Sulawesi, so we can find the many geothermal place which is not related with the volcanic activity. Okay. So the number 3, we have some problems in flying geothermal utilization in Indonesia. It is I think every country also have some problem in the utilization geothermal utilization applied and applying geothermal utilization because every country is different from one to one, to another. So in 2014, Indonesia have the target to be that according to the primary energy mix, electricity and non-electricity referring to the national energy policy. Is this government regulation number 79. In the year of 2025, the renewable energy, the green color here, will be targeted to be 23%. At this time, it is about 16% in 2014 at this time. But in the target in 2025, it's about 23. Hopefully, that can be reached. And then, according to the electricity power energy mix, from the renewable energy, the electricity will be 25%, 25%. And this is from coal, this is from the gas, and like this. Okay, that's the target for the electricity and power energy mix. Well, and then what we have some problems. The problems is about there are some overlap regulation mainly between forestry and mining sectors. We can and then also at the time, 2014, no person has responsible formally yet in monitoring geothermal exertion. And then the third problem, in this problem, at the time, the people who are responsible for monitoring geothermal is together with the mining inspector. So mining inspector are together with the geothermal inspectors. So, but after that, we can go to the next step for the what is this explanation. Then electricity network in Indonesia, it is also mainly in eastern part. It hasn't not covered evenly yet. So about 70% of the power general power is electricity power is located as Java and Bali, 70%. So it is also should be distributed a bit wide to all over Indonesia. Then geothermal exertion price is too low compared to the with those for oil and gas. as it is it was in the 2000 and before 2012. The price for geothermal extraction, it is about 9.6 cent dollar per kilowatt hour. But according to the for oil and gas, if we transfer to the kilowatt hours units, it is about 27. So it is very far between the difference between the extraction in geothermal and also in sulfur in oil and gas. So, but it was really good, and there are some changing in the regulation in 2014. In 2014, that Indonesia is classified into 3 places. It is so the price for the geothermal extraction is about between 9 to 12, and the second class is about 13 to 19, and then the third class is about between 19 to 74 cent dollar per kWh per kilowatt hours. That's but the problem is in the 2018, the regulation was changed again and back to the first regulation. So that's the a little bit of problem. Okay, another problem is geothermal developers have some difficulties in doing geothermal extraction. There are some difficulties in doing, there are many, including the assets, of course. So then also the geothermal export is still limited at the time. And then on the other hand, many geothermal developers carry out the extraction lately. Now, this is for who developed the geothermal. And then the Indonesian target is also to reach the 7,000 megawatt in 2025. Although it is difficult to be realized according to the existing condition of geothermal extraction. That's the problem. What I noted. Then now we come to the number 4. This is energy master plan and regulation and policy. Well, to answer the problems I noted before, so we can see it here. But it is really lucky. I'm lucky because this is the Indonesia's regulation for geothermal development. This is technically, this is the law about the energy, and this is the law about the special for geothermal, and it's a law for the what is working creation. This is a new one, 2020. But and then also some regulation, Geothermal regulation. It is about the energy, national energy policy, and then this is all for the indirect geothermal, and then also there are some direct geothermal, and then also some president decree. Well, this is the general plan for energy, national energy, something like that. This is the all the regulations should just push the problem what we had before. And then according to the this is the Indonesian regulation for work safety and environment. So there's a law of number 1, and then also in law number 21 also is also stated mentioned about the safety of geothermal, and then also some geothermal government regulation and something, also ministry regulation about the safety work, and then also from facilities, and then also from Director General regulation also, it was made from
Ade, you have 5 minutes left, Ade. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we have some, and then for the supervision and monitoring or inspectors, geothermal inspector. So we had now administrative monitoring, and then the other one is operational monitoring. So it is also already solved about the inspectors in geothermal. This is the source from Director General of EBDKE. Well, now, so government initiative. This is very important. There are 3 points. This is really very good. Exploration of program by government from 2020 until 2024. So the government makes efforts through technical data acquisition for increasing the project motivation to all who works in geothermal extraction. And then this project is carried out at 8 regions. It is Cisolok, Tampomas, it is West Java. Cisolok, Tampomas, Ciremai, West Java, Gunung Hudut, Nage, Nusa Tenggara, and then Biduang, Sembalut, and Mara. So one of our students also is was sent to Cisolok to work there, because it is very, very good time for us to send them, so they can study about everything about the drilling in the Cisolok there. The second one is government strategy in developing geothermal extraction. That the aim is to overcome challenges through activities and collaboration. Then the stakeholders are experts from universities and a business organization and community. It is really very good. So this will accelerate the realization of government activity. Well, what I mentioned about the mechanism of the surveys for geothermal energy, and then also to know the classification and the potential of geothermal, something like that. This is really parallel with this one. And then the incentive in Indonesian geothermal extension, using the incentive and budget facility, is carried out for remaining project bankability. This is really very, very important, because very expected. It is really expected by the company who work at geothermal extraction. Right. So what is in conclusion and suggestion? First one, Indonesia is a huge has a huge geothermal potential. The second one, Indonesia has some problems in developing the geothermal utilization, but the government of Indonesia had responded to problems through efforts such as completing regulation, collaboration with experts from university, government organization, and society. This can overcome some problem, so that is now have been much better. The price for developing geothermal extraction, this is from myself. should be better raised in Indonesia to balance with those for other sectors, because I'm still waiting for the new regulation about the price for developing geothermal for the company. And then the last one is by consequent following the regulation during the geothermal extension, it can be surely that government target can be approached, hopefully. Well, I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Pak Ade, for your nice presentation. Maybe I will make some summarize. Yeah, you also have make some conclusion for your presentation. First is Indonesia has huge geothermal energy potential, and I think Sumatra Island has the highest geothermal energy now. And then almost 80% are volcanic geothermal energy in Indonesia, and maybe approximately only 20% is non-volcanic. Now Indonesia government already built 4 master plan and a target for the geothermal energy development. And you also explain about the step or stage in the developing of geothermal energy. And for the last one, I think we have some problem related with geothermal energy development, especially related with the mining and the forestry sector. Because mostly I think the geothermal is in the protected forest. Okay, Pak Ade, thank you for your presentation. Maybe we will continue to the discussion. There are several questions already mentioning in the Q&A column, and then I think Nick already answered this question, but Nick, you should answer directly. So I will read the question and then you ask directly in this webinar. First is from Azaria Haikal Ahmad. He asked about the converting oil and gas well to geothermal well. Is that more feasible than hot dry rock for now?
So there are a number of challenges there. So it's very common for especially gas fields to be high temperature, which is part of the reason they become gas fields. You have a couple of problems when you want to consider conversion. So one, the wells that are drilled are relatively small diameter because they are being used to produce a low viscosity fluid like a natural gas, oil, and just a little bit of water, and the production rates can be lower. So you don't have sufficient diameter. Another factor is that in many of those fields, you will still continue to co-produce some amount of natural gas. As you draw that fluid up the well and pressure in the well reduces, you're going to see an expansion of that natural gas. And that expansion will consume some of the thermal energy that you want to extract from the water. That resulting lower temperature makes it less ideal for electrical generation, although it could still be used for direct use. And this is often called co-produced fluids. But this is this idea of hot sedimentary basins, like we would expect for natural gas, is an interesting way to exploit it. The issues, though, are that the wells really aren't sufficient for use. You would have a tremendous amount of information about the resource that you could exploit. And then there are these co-produced fluid issues. The one other caveat that I would add to this is some places in these large gas fields have considered whether or not they could use that information to estimate whether there's a resource underneath the gas field that would not have the presence of the gas, but could take advantage of the high temperatures. In that case, use the seismic data and the well data from the gas field to better constrain that resource because that's already been paid for and could be available. I will note that that does generally have some of its own challenges. One is that drilling through those regions, you tend to have very high pressures that make the well susceptible to failure. And but the trade-off is that you have lots of experienced drillers in that region who might be able to help you successfully drill through those gas fields to the underlying rock.
Oke, thank you, Nick.